Merry Christmas. I'm Kotz. I'm one of the pastors here, and I have the privilege of doing the Christmas sermon today. So, you're stuck with me. Okay, let's start with reading the Christmas story. This is the version that we find in the book of Luke. There's two versions of it. There's Luke version and there's a Matthew version. Next year, we're going to do the Matthew version. Okay, here we go. In those days, about 2,000 years ago, Caesar Augustus issued a decree that a census should be taken of the entire Roman world. Caesar Augustus is an emperor. He has brought political oppression upon a group of people, like a lot of people. So the story starts off with really, really grim news, okay? Now, in parentheses, it says this was the first census that took place while Quirinius was governor of Syria. Now, the reason why he's taking a census is because he wants to tax people even more, because he decided to decorate, in the Christmas spirit, he wanted to decorate the whole place with statues of himself that was plated in gold, and, that's not cheap. So he wanted to make sure that he had enough money to do it, so he wanted to tax everybody. So that means the poor in those days got taxed even more than the rich. All right. So weird that happened that back then, huh? And everyone went to their own town to register. The only way they could keep track of where people were was by following the genealogy and saying, well, you were originally born here, so you have to go take your census over there. Check in over there, okay? Now, it turns out there's some characters in this story. We're talking about Joseph and Mary. So Joseph also went up from the town of Nazareth in Galilee to Judea, to Bethlehem, to the town of David, because he belonged to the house of the line of David. So Mary and Joseph have to travel from where they live, which is Nazareth, all the way to Bethlehem, which is roughly like 90 to 95 miles away. Now, if you're wondering how far that is, it's like from here to, I'm going to say, Santa Barbara. Now, I know you guys have seen those videos and those cartoons and those animations of Mary and Joseph on a donkey. There's no mention of donkey in this story. There might have been. There might have been a wagon. I don't know. But this is not an easy trek to make. Agreed? Oh, and to make things even worse, right, it says he went there to register with Mary, who was pledged to be married, which means she wasn't married. That means that there's a couple that lives together that aren't married, and in the ancient Israelite world, that was like a huge no-no, and was expecting a child. And you know the story. They're going to give birth to Jesus later on. So she was probably like 8 months pregnant, 95 miles, and everybody is shunning them because they're having a baby before they got married. Okay, let's keep going. While they were there, the time came for the baby to be born, and she gave birth to her firstborn, a son. She wrapped him in cloths and placed him in a manger because there was no guest room available for them. Now, here's a weird thing. This is Joseph's hometown, and he doesn't have a place to stay. He should have family there, but for some reason he has to give birth, or his wife has to give birth, not in a nice, comfortable house, but by a manger, which is a feeding trough, meaning there's animals there. It's unsanitary. So what happened? Oh, it's probably because they did the no-no, right? Like, they had a baby before they got married. So now the story seems to be like, okay, so there's Augustus Caesar, oh, that's bad, right? And he has to travel, they have to travel, oh, that's bad. And they were pregnant, that's bad. And it just gets worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. That's a Christmas story, right? Let's keep going. And there were shepherds. Now we're kind of like cutting the movie there, and we're now outside. And now we see shepherds. Now shepherds, if you heard me talk about shepherds before, you'll know that shepherds were actually very, today, we look at the paintings of shepherds with the angel and everything, and it's like, oh, that's so beautiful. No, not back then. Shepherds had a very bad reputation because their job didn't require much skill. All they had to do was just talk to the sheep all day, and the sheep would recognize the shepherd's voice, and that was good enough. You don't need any degree to become a shepherd, right? And so they would just hang out outside, and, they would get bored. So what do? They would be like, well, sheep, you stay here while I go to that house and rob them, take some stuff, and then run away with it. So they had a really bad reputation. So all of a sudden, we go from a very bad story to cut to a really bad person or a group of people living out in the fields nearby, keeping watch of their flock at night. An angel of the Lord appeared to them. Now, in the Old Testament, this is the first story in the New Testament. In the Old Testament, whenever an angel showed up, everyone's like, uh-oh, oh crap, this is not good, because they usually show up to give me bad news, right? So it was like they appeared, and the glory of the Lord shone around them, and they were terrified. Rightfully so. They were like, how do they know what we did? Like, oh no, we're caught. Okay, let's keep going. But the angel said to them, do not be afraid, because I'm not here to call you out. I bring you good news that will cause great joy for all the people. Today in the town of David, a Savior has been born to you. He is the Messiah, the Lord. So today what I want to do is I want to focus on this concept of joy. Because we see all these bad things happen, and then we cut to another group of people, and all these bad things are happening, and then there's some good news, and it says joy. This is a story of joy. And so you probably heard that the word joy is associated with Christmas, right? But here is the problem I have with joy. And maybe some of you guys could agree with me. In the, let's see, this is 2024, so 20 years or so that I've been pastoring, excuse me, I have come across a lot of people where they say, I know Christmas is the season of joy, but something terrible happened. I lost somebody this year. I was just laid off of my work. The doctor just gave me some bad news about my health. And I'm supposed to be joyful? And there are usually two types of people when this happens, right? The first one is, but it says that Christmas is a season of joy, and I'm not feeling joyful, so maybe there's something wrong with me. Maybe if I devote myself to Jesus even more, then maybe I'll have more joy. That something must be, maybe my faith is broken. I need to turn in my Christian badge because I'm done with this. I can't get myself to muster up the joy that I'm supposed to. It seems like everybody else around me is joyful, and I'm the only one. That's the first kind of person. The second kind of person is usually the one that says, well, you know what? I'm not feeling joyful, but I don't want the people around me to know, so I'm just going to fake it till I make it. Right? Maybe if I keep telling myself that I'm supposed to be joyful, I'm supposed to be joyful, I'm supposed to be joyful, then maybe eventually I'll convince myself that I am, and then, problem solved, right? And neither of these are healthy choices. Are we allowed to grieve during Christmas? And for some of us, maybe I don't know about the people here, but I had conversations with people outside of this church, and some of them said, this might be my last Christmas. I'm like, that is so sad. So what are we supposed to do? It's like, Kotz, I know you. You're going to tell us that there's like a Hebrew word for the word joy, and it's not exactly what we think it means, right? Well, no, actually, the word joy in the Hebrew means joy. It's joy, right? So it's not like, okay. So you look through the Bible, and by the way, this is how scholars study words in the Bible. You look for a word, and if you have a concordance, life is so much easier. You look for a word, and you look for every time the word is used and what they're associated with. And with that, you start to get a better idea, a better shape of what that word is supposed to mean. And this is what I discovered. So I've been studying the word joy for a few years now, because 10 years ago, somebody said, Kotz, are you going to preach on joy? And I said, sure. And it took me this long to figure this out. Okay, so what I discovered is that joy in the Bible, most of the time, is associated with circumstances. Right? It's based heavily on circumstances. So like in Psalm 65, they talk about how there's like a flock of sheep and a big harvest, and that brought me joy. That's kind of like today when we're like, I looked at my bank account and I'm like, oh, I'm so happy, right? There's other verses like in the book of Jeremiah, there's a passage there that says that the streets will be filled with people because there's a wedding happening, and that brings us joy. Yeah, like when there's a party, of course we're going to be happy, right? Or in the book of Proverbs, it says that sometimes when I smell perfume, it brings me joy. Now that, for some people, yes, other people no, but you get the idea, right? So it's heavily dependent on circumstances. There are verses in the Bible about how when nothing is happening, and they're like, God, why aren't you answering my prayers? And they remember the circumstances that happened in the past. Oh, remember when God delivered us from slavery? Oh, that memory brings me joy. Again, dependent on circumstances. Sometimes the joy in the Bible is talking about things that are going to happen in the future, and we're not sure if it's going to happen, but because of what God's done in the past, we're like, that's definitely going to happen because God did this in the past, and that brings me joy. Again, heavily dependent on circumstances. But then, when I was living in Northern California, I met this couple. Well, there was a family of 4. And the son was in a motorcycle accident. And when that happened, I was already down here, and I got a call saying, hey, Kotz, can you come up here? And we need you to do the funeral service. I'm like, okay. So I flew up there, and I saw them. They were dressed in black, and it was like a room was filled. This boy was part of a motorcycle gang, and he wore a helmet and everything, and he was driving, and the car in front of him like just stopped suddenly. So he tried his brake, and he slowed down, and barely he stopped right in time, but he bumped the car in front of him just a little bit. He lost balance. He fell over, and then oncoming traffic came and ran over his helmet and cracked his neck, and that's how he passed away. And all his friends, his biker gang friends, were there at the time. And I thought, man, what words can I say? Because as a pastor, you're supposed to give a word of comfort at the end, right? And so we do the whole service. Some people come up, they're like, this song is dedicated to you, my friend. Or this person's like, I wrote a note for my friend. I just want to read it to everybody. It was a really sad service. And there's a big crowd of people there, and all the biker gang guys are in the back, and all their motorcycles are parked in the streets, and everybody's like honking out there. But as I'm standing there, and I was co-officiating with somebody else, the parents are sitting straight right in front of me. And as I'm watching them, there's tears of sadness and there's tears of joy. I see tears of joy in their eyes. And I'm like, I don't know what's going on, right? Like, if joy is supposed to be heavily dependent on circumstances, there's nothing they could do to bring their son back. So I'm like, what's going on with them, right? And at the very end of the program, after I give the word of comfort, they're supposed to come up. And it says on the program that they're going to say a few words. So I'm like, I think they're going to come up and say, thank you for joining us. Hey, we're going to have a buffet afterwards. Come and join us. I thought that's what they're going to do. But instead, when it was their turn to come up, they came up with a guitar and a harmonica. And they're like, hey, everybody, I want to sing this song, and I hope that you guys could join in. And I'm like, what song? What are they going to sing? And they start strumming, and they start singing, this little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine. Everybody sing along. And I'm like, like that. And I thought, what's going on? Like, this is not heavily dependent on circumstances. What kind of joy is this? So I started reading the Bible again after the service, and I talked to them too, like, what is this about? And as I read through it, I came across the New Testament where there's all these stories of like people like Paul the Apostle who's in prison. And he says, guys, this might be my last stop. I might be killed here or I might be let go. Either way, I'm good. Like, okay, so there it is. There is that kind of joy that's not dependent on circumstances. It's kind of the Christmas story. It's not like anything they do is going to dethrone Caesar Augustus from the throne, or it's not like because of something they do, they don't have to walk all the way, or that they're not going to have So there's this other kind of joy that we find in the Bible that's not dependent on circumstances. So the question is this: can I have joy amid terrible circumstances? So wait a minute. So in the Bible, it seems like there's 2 types of joy. 2 types of joy. And the thing that makes this difficult is that it's hard to distinguish in the Bible. Because it's not like they have one Hebrew word for this kind of joy and another Hebrew word for this kind of joy. It's not like that. It's like they use the same word, and it's up to you to figure out which kind of joy they're talking about. Right? So scholars have discovered this, and they can't agree on what they call it. Because they're like, there's joy and joy, right? So I came up with a term for me, and you guys could adopt it too. I call it joy 1.0. It's the first kind that we just talked about, right? Excuse me. Joy. So like joy 1.0 is kind of like, is life good? Yes. Then there's joy, right? Did God answer my prayer? Yes. Then there's joy, right? Circumstances. Am I healthy? Yes. Joyful, right? Did I get a raise? Yes? Joyful. Did I get into the school of my choice? Sure. Joyful, right? I don't know how long that joy will last, but, joyful, right? Joy 1.0 in the Bible is described as something good. I know I'm kind of being facetious and making it sound like it's a joke, but in the Bible, it's always a good thing to have this kind of joy, and I hope you have that joy this Christmas season, right? But what I discovered is that this kind of joy does not mix well with bad news. Like I said, if this Christmas is especially hard for you, how are you supposed to have joy in the midst of that, right? Because it's heavily dependent on circumstances. So there's another kind of joy. You guessed it. It's called joy 2.0. I know, very creative. And what I'm discovering that this joy 2.0 is that it could coexist with bad news. And as a matter of fact, it seems that bad news is a prerequisite. You need to have bad news in your life in order to experience joy 2.0. Actually, the bad news informs the grief that you're supposed to experience, informs this kind of joy. So how do we grasp this kind of joy, right? Because maybe this year, Christmas is really hard for you. So I want to share with you where most of this stuff is coming from. So here is the Bible, okay, long line, Old Testament, New Testament. Now, for those of you Bible nerds, there's 4 types of literature you find in the Old Testament, okay? The 4 kinds are, like 1, 2, 3, 4, right here, the 4 kinds. The 4 kinds are this. We have the Torah, which is the law, like do this, thou shalt not do this, all that kind of stuff. Then we have history, these like the book of Joshua, the book of Judges, 1st and 2nd Samuel, Chronicles that nobody reads, okay? Then there's like wisdom literature, which is what we're going to talk about today. And then we have the prophets, like the Jeremiahs and Isaiahs and all the Yahya's, and that's over there, okay? I don't know if any of you guys read all that stuff. But I want to focus on the wisdom literature. This is what we call wisdom literature. Next slide. And in wisdom literature, there's 5 books: Job, Psalm, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Song of Songs. Job, you probably know that story. It's about a guy who had everything, he lost everything, and then, he has this, there's like 2 chapters of plot, and everything else is just commentary. And Psalms, a lot of songs and poetry you find there. Now, Proverbs, next slide. There we go, Proverbs. Proverbs is what more modern scholars would like to call life hacks. It's not a bunch of laws and rules. It's basically a bunch of advice that he's giving you. He's saying, if you want to have a good life, then do these things and don't do these things, okay? And there's a whole bunch of those things. If you want to have good circumstances in your life that can eventually lead to joy, make sure you do all these things. Now, like one of them says, like, if you want to be wise, then you need to be humble, because people who are not humble will not learn anything new because they think they know everything, right? So that's good advice, write it down, right? So Proverbs is what we call conventional wisdom. Conventional wisdom. Basically what it says is, it's probably stuff that you grew up on from your parents, like eat your vegetables, because if you eat your vegetables, then you're going to be healthy, right? Or save your money, because if you save your money, you won't be poor later on. It's the A leads to B leads to C, right? If you do A and B right, A plus B will always equal C. It's called causality. If this, then that, okay? My parents taught me, if you keep drinking milk when you're young, you'll grow tall. And that didn't really work out for me. I wish I was taller, or if you, but I guess that's not, you won't find that in the Proverbs because it's not there. If you do X, Y, Z, then you will have good circumstances, which will give you joy. Joy 1.0, okay? Now, right after the book of Proverbs, we have the book of Ecclesiastes. Now, Ecclesiastes, if you were just to read it straight up, you're going to be like, okay, this confuses me. The reason why it's so weird is because we need to know why the book of Ecclesiastes was written. The book of Ecclesiastes is written for people who follow the book of Proverbs, who follow conventional wisdom, and still got burned. I ate all my vegetables. I didn't smoke. I didn't drink. And what? I have cancer? Ecclesiastes was written for people who are like, but I studied really hard, but I didn't get into the school of my choice. Or maybe you studied really hard and you got into the school of your choice so you could get the job of your dreams, but you didn't get that job. Or you were like, I'm going to be the best husband or best wife or best whatever in this relationship, and you still got a divorce. Ecclesiastes is a book that's written for people who fell through the cracks of conventional wisdom. A plus B didn't equal C for these people. It actually equaled Z. I was a great employee. I came in early, I left late. I was loyal to my company, and I still got laid off. On Christmas, that'd be worse, right? So what do I do? How do I find joy in the midst of that kind of grief? My doctor told me, what? How am I supposed to face my family? My family is depending on me to stay alive, and you're telling me what? How am I supposed to go home and tell the people I love most this news? And I'm supposed to have joy for Christmas? What? So the book of Ecclesiastes was written for people who are having a cruddy day. Okay, so let's take a look at that. Ecclesiastes starts off like this. The words of the teacher, son of David, king in Jerusalem. So you're going to meet this character. He's called a master teacher. He's the one that says, I live this life. I know, I see everything now. I observed it. I took notes, and I'm going to pour out my wisdom on you. That's this teacher. Let's see what he has to say. He says this. Meaningless, meaningless, says the teacher. Utterly meaningless. Everything is meaningless. Merry Christmas. We'll close in prayer. No. You're like, what does meaningless mean, right? I mean, like, what? Well, in the Hebrew, the word for meaningless is the word hevel, H-E-V-E-L. If you took the Bible study course with us, the name Abel is actually pronounced hevel. It means meaningless. I know. Imagine naming your son meaningless. But meaningless is an image. The word hevel is an image of somebody spraying some water. It's like a mist, and it's here for a second, and it's gone. It's here for a second, and it's gone. He says, your life is this short, and it has no meaning because it's here for a minute, and it's gone. What is this teacher trying to tell us, right? Well, share with us more. All things are wearisome, more than one can say. What has been will be again. What has been done will be done again. There is nothing new under the sun. Is there anything of which one can say, look, this is something new? No, it was here already, long ago. It was here before our time. It's like, so if you're looking for something new, you're not looking for anything new because everything that's on this earth has been here before. So, yeah. Well, maybe I do have meaning in my life. No, there are a lot of people before you who tried to find meaning. They couldn't find any. Bleh. Yeah, the Hebrew word bleh. Your life is bleh. Well, maybe I'll find meaning, not in material things, but maybe in wisdom. Yeah, the real value is what I have in here, So, and he's like, nope, been there too. Let me tell you about that. And I said to myself, look, I have increased in wisdom more than anyone who has ruled over Jerusalem before me. You want to know if wisdom is worth anything? Guess what? I'm the wisest guy alive. I am the wise guy. Then I applied myself to the understanding of wisdom and also of madness and folly. But I learned that this too is a chasing after the wind. It is pointless. There's no reason for you to go look for wisdom. Well, why? Why? Explain to me. Are you saying that wisdom has no value? No, I didn't say wisdom didn't have any value. Next verse. He says, I saw wisdom is better than folly. If you're going to be foolish, I think it's better for you to be wise. So, yeah, wisdom has some value. Just as light is better than darkness. The wise have eyes in their heads, while the fool walks in the darkness. You see, so my life has meaning because I'm filled with wisdom. Nope. Why? But I came to realize that the same fate overtakes them both. You're both going to die. You think you're going to live a better life, and you think you're going to live longer, you're going to live forever because you're wise? No, you're going to die. Here lies person A, here lies person B. Wise, fool, look, same fate. What's the point? Yeah, I told you this is not your typical Christmas sermon. Oh, I know. What if, because that's in here, right? Wisdom is in here. What if I left something behind for people to remember me by? Like, what if I built a big statue or a big building? I donated a lot of money to a library, and what about that? Right? Then after I pass, people will say, oh, look, this person left a lot of things. This person has a lot of value. Meaningful or meaningless? This is what the great teacher says. Master teacher says, so I hated life because the work that is done under the sun was grievous to me. All of it is meaningless, a chasing after the wind. He says, working it's not happy time for us. But sir, it's not the work that gives you happiness. It's what you get out of it, right? Like the paycheck. It's like, no, well, let's see. I hated all the things I had toiled under the sun because I must leave them to the one who comes after me. You work your tail off and you get a bunch of money, right? And now you die because you can't die with your money. And so the money gets left for somebody else. And now somebody else who didn't work as hard as you takes the money and does whatever he or she wants to do with it. Does that seem fair? And who knows whether that person will be wise or foolish? What if that person just undoes everything I did? Like I made the world a better place. I hand it off to the next person takes it and makes it worse. Yet they will have control over all the fruit of my toil in which I have poured my effort and skill under the sun. Now, this master teacher, do you think this person has joy? He definitely doesn't have joy 1.0, I can tell you that, right? He sounds like someone who was burned by conventional wisdom. Like, look, I worked really hard. I did everything that the book of Proverbs told, all the advice, all the life hacks. I did it so I could have a good life. But in hindsight, I realized, like, what am I doing this for? Wow, is there any good news in this sermon, Kotz? No, it gets worse. Next one. In this meaningless life of mine, I have seen both things, the righteous perishing and the righteous in their righteousness, and the wicked living long in their wickedness. He says, let me disabuse you of this notion. There is absolutely no correlation between how you live and how long you live, okay? Like, he says the people who are righteous, the word righteous in Hebrew is the same word for justice. People who are looking at the world and seeing how broken it is and they want to fix it. It's like these people who try to fix the world get consumed by it. The people who are living in a comfortable world that they were making a life off of in the broken world, they're going to hate on you, and you're going to hate yourself for not being able to accomplish that much, and you live a short life, and you live a miserable life. And here's somebody who doesn't know what's going on. And I've seen people who stood for justice die early, and I've seen people who live foolishly live long. So, which one do you want to live, right? Okay, so finally we're going to get to the solution to this problem. The master teacher is like, I will tell you one thing that I learned from all this. Silver lining. So this is what I have observed to be good. This is the first time he said, I found something good, guys. Meaningless, something good. Here we go. It is appropriate for a person to eat, to drink, and find satisfaction in their toilsome labor. Now, you're like, oh yeah, after, a tough life, I just want to eat and drink, right? He's not talking about getting drunk. He's not talking about gluttony. He's just saying, in every bite you take, you find joy in that. In every sip of water you drink, you're like, this is water. And you find joy in that. If you find something satisfying in your work, you focus and you do that. Lose track of time. What does he mean by that? Well, 3 chapters later, he repeats himself again. He says this. So I commend the enjoyment of life. Joy, there it is. Right? I want you to enjoy your life. I want you to have joy. Although your circumstances aren't changing, there is a way to have joy, because there is nothing better for a person under the sun than to eat and drink and be glad. Enjoy every drink of water. Enjoy every cracker, every scoop of rice, every bit of food you eat. Savor it, right? And he's like, and I want you to enjoy life. Be glad. Then joy will accompany them in their toil and the days of the life God has given them under the sun. Now, remember, this is for people who have fallen through the cracks, right? He repeats this again in the next chapter, but this time he gets more specific as to what kind of drink, because now we're talking about alcoholic beverages. He says this, so go, eat your food with gladness. It's a burger. This is the best burger I've ever had. And look at this fry. Whoa. It's so crunchy, but it's so soft on the inside. This is so good. What? This is from McDonald's? Wow, I didn't know that they made such great French fries. Enjoy everything that you have. Drink your wine with joyful heart. Drinking wine in that culture usually meant celebration, like a party, like a wedding or a birthday party or something, right? It's like every time somebody has some reason to celebrate, join in on that celebration. Enjoy life with whom you love. You're surrounded by people and you're like, I am so glad that you're a part of my life. Let's go for another round. The master teacher is pointing to an observation that he's made over the years. And I want to explain to you what's going on here through a chart. Okay, so here we go. This is your life. Next slide. This is your life. Okay, and so far life is going pretty good, right? So this is Proverbs, like all the life hacks that we talked about in Proverbs, conventional wisdom. Everything that you're doing is happening exactly the way that your parents taught you. Brush your teeth so you don't have to get a cavity. It works out. Perfect. Study hard for your tests. Good grades. Awesome. Right? Be yourself and people accept you. It's like, oh, okay, that didn't really work out. Right? So every once in a while, and I'm convinced that a lot of people go through this, there's a dip in your life where conventional wisdom doesn't work for you anymore. This is the dark part of your life. A part of your life that you don't wish upon even your worst enemy. Somebody you love passed away. You have regrets that you have, and you're like, I don't know how to fix it. You sit down in the doctor's office, and the doctor tells you something that you were dreading to hear, but there it is right in front of you. You don't know what to do with it. And so you go home and you weep. Or you have a situation at work, and you're like, I don't think I could work here anymore, but my family is counting on me to provide for them. What am I going to do? Or you did everything you can to keep your family together, but now it's starting to fall apart. And your heart is heavy. You don't know what to do. You have a group of friends you grew up with, and all of a sudden they betray you. And you put all your eggs in that basket, so after you kind of break apart from your friends, you realize you're alone. You haven't talked to anybody in days. You never felt so alone. You never felt so dark. Maybe there's a situation where you're wrongfully imprisoned. Somebody betrayed me. I don't belong here, but I have to stay here. Maybe it's an addiction. I just can't pull myself away from these habits. What am I supposed to do? I was taught in Sunday school that if I did these things, I could avoid all those things, but something happened. Something's wrong. Is it my fault? Is it God's fault? Is it the world's fault? I don't know, but playing the blame game doesn't seem to work, so I'm not, this is the loneliest I've ever been. But the story goes that, but somehow you survived that. And on the other side of this dark part of your life, this heaviness, you have Ecclesiastes that says, there's wisdom that you could have after the wisdom that failed you. The master teacher says, there's this unexplainable joy that you can find on the other side of this. So this is joy 1.0, okay? Joy 1.0 is dependent on circumstances. As long as life is going well for you, as long as God is answering your prayers, as long as everything is going the way you thought life should go, you're good. But the problem with joy 1.0 is this. When bad things happen to you, it starts to crumble. So what do? You build a wall right here. So I've heard a lot of people say, in order to experience joy 1.0, because you can't have joy and grief mixed with each other, because that's hard to coexist, you have to be naive. You have to pretend like this doesn't exist. You have to be ignorant to some level. Do you know how bad the world is? Oh, no, well, I refuse to hear that. La, 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 la. They cancel your favorite show. No, that's not true. Da, 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 la, 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 la. Star Wars keeps making episodes that aren't good. Nope, don't. I refuse to hear it, right? There's a lot of denial that takes place with Joy 1.0 for Joy 1.0 to work. But what's interesting is that Joy 2.0, it embraces the whole thing. As a matter of fact, this informs what kind of joy you're going to have. You need to have this in your life in order to experience this joy. And this is the joy that Paul the Apostle experienced in the book of Philippians, where he says, I might die here, but I'm still filled with joy. The Bible sometimes refers to this as the joy that's unexplainable. It doesn't ignore the bad. Instead, it wraps its arm around the whole thing. Circumstances don't change in this version of the story of joy. There's nothing that Paul can do that's going to get him out of jail or be killed. And eventually he was killed. But he had joy through the whole thing. There's the couple that I was talking to after the funeral, there's nothing they could have done to bring their son back. So what is this? It's this idea that because you've experienced the depths of how bad things can go, that when you come out on the other side, there's a new appreciation. You see, in Joy 1.0, you wait for the circumstances to change for you. In Joy 2.0, the circumstances stay the same, but you change. You start seeing the world differently. You pick up a cup and say, I haven't had a fresh cup of water in a long time. This is the best. This is so refreshing. There's an appreciation for something that you didn't have, but now you have it because you experienced this. A 10-minute conversation with friends is kind of like, yeah, what did you do today? I just talked to my friends for 10 minutes. Yeah, it was cool. Yeah, we just talked about whatever. But for a person over here who's experienced loneliness, I got to spend 10 minutes with my friends today. And hearing that person's voice, it was reassuring. The high five he gave me, I'm never going to forget that. Like, there's this joy that you experience because you've experienced this. This is what the book of Ecclesiastes is pointing to, is that a lot of people have experienced this, and guess what? Life feels like it's meaningless. But then you realize there is meaning in life because you appreciate everything that you see around you. You can find joy in every sip, every small bite, every exchange of words. That's the kind of joy he's talking about. Joy that surpasses all understanding. Quick side note. Cynicism are people who are standing right here and they dip their toe into the dark night of the soul and they're like, no, thank you. And they just point fingers and they just criticize because that's the easy thing to do, right? So, Joy 2.0 is when you begin, next slide, you begin to notice all the gifts that God has given you. You start realizing everything, the little bread that I have right here, it's so good. This must be a gift from God. This drink, oh, so refreshing. This must be from God. You see, up until now, we've been taking everything for granted, right? But the deep parts of our lives, the heavy parts of our lives is the thing that makes us say, oh my gosh, I've taken everything for granted. Do you guys realize how many good things we have in our lives right now? Right? The 10-minute convo with your friends, the food at the restaurant. You're like, I know this is a chain restaurant, but this is so delicious because this is Habit Burger, right? It's like, yeah, but there's some chef a few years ago that was putting a burger together and said, if I add just a little more salt, okay, we're going to take this recipe, we're going to multiply, and we're going to... Somebody back then must have come up with the perfect recipe for a cheeseburger or whatever. I don't know, right? Have you had their string bean tempura thing? It's so good. Okay. You see, joy. Okay. Or maybe for the first time you look into the sky and you see a sunset. And you're like, that is so beautiful. Why didn't I notice it before? You're looking through old photos and you see, like, look at when we were having fun. You know, every time we talk about good times, we always talk about it as a thing that happens in the past. Remember those days, the good old days? And we could only enjoy it after it passed. People who've experienced the deep, heavy moments of your life and it has come to the other side, they're able to experience right there when it's actually happening. You get socks for Christmas. Most people will be like, socks? People with Joy 2.0 are going to say, socks? How do they know that I wear socks? And somebody went through the trouble of decorating it with Christmas trees? I could wear them now. It's Christmas season. And whoever bought these put it in a box that's bigger so it looks like I'm getting something bigger for Christmas, but I open it's just socks. That person has a sense of humor. I love that person. Joy. You find joy in the small things because Joy 2.0. You've lived through the deepest parts of your life and you come to the other side and you start to appreciate the small things. And then you start noticing that in people. You begin to notice things like, you begin to notice that the value in every single person exists. Because you start to realize that God's image is in everybody. I go for a walk, a lot of time during the weekday, I park my car at my kids' school because, it gets crowded when it's time to pick them up. So I park there around noon and I go for a walk to nearby Starbucks with my laptop and I work from there. And I take this, it's like a mile walk. That's where my exercise comes in. And I walk, and every time I walk, I pass by this one person that's walking the other way, and almost like routine, every time I walk past that person. And I started thinking, I don't know that person, but that person has a story. And whatever that person's story is, it's led them to this place where they're walking down the street, going the opposite direction from me, and we always kind of glance at each other as we pass each other. That person has a story. And God knows that story. I should get to know that person one day. And then you start to notice the barista. God's image is in that person too. I should talk to that person. Maybe what that person tells me might be a message from God. I don't know, right? Right? And so you start saying like, wow, that person is the image of God. That person's the image of God. That person on TV is the image of God. What will God say to me today? There's joy. When I was 13 years old, for most of you guys know that at the age of 1, I was diagnosed I have a heart condition. The doctor, when you go to the children's hospital, the doctor's not going to tell you, hey, you're going to die. So when I turned 13, the doctor sat me down and he said, I want to tell you what's going to happen to you. And he had no bedside manners. He was basically like, so you might not make it past your 20s. Have a nice day. And I remember going home and I cried. I wept. And it'd be so hard for me to fall asleep because I don't know if I'm going to wake up the next morning, right? And that continued for years where I'm just like afraid to fall asleep. Until, one day, something just, like a switch just clicked in my life that said like, wait a minute, every morning I wake up is a new gift. I get to enjoy another day. Every breath is a gift. Right? And so you start seeing that life is a series of gifts from God, and you see this new kind of joy that surpasses all understanding. When I sat down and I actually met with them after the funeral, the parents, I said, so why did you pick this little light of mine? Like, I'm just curious. And they looked at me, they were smiling, and they said, Kotz, when we had our son, he was a gift to us from God. And when he passed away, we felt like God took that gift away from us. But that night, there was a knock on our door. When we opened the door, the whole bike gang was outside their door, and they all had candle lights, and they were paying respects. And at that moment, they realized that our son was a gift from God, and now everybody here is a gift from God. And so they found this joy. It's like there's nothing we could do to bring our son back. And we grieve and we mourn and we're sad. We wish that didn't happen to us. And we don't want that to happen to anybody. But that day at the funeral, we realized that everybody here is a gift from God to us. And that's why we sang that song. This little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine. Yeah. And they said this one thing that stuck with me since. They said, up until that tragic thing happened, I always thought that life was darkness with a bit of light shining through. That we live in a dark world. And every once in a while, God will shine his light through. It's like, oh, there's something good right there. And it goes away. It's like, oh, another light. And it was just like every once in a while, you see some pockets of light here and there. And he said, but after the dark night of their souls, and they came out on the other end, they discovered that no, it's actually... the world is sunny. It's a sunny day with patches of clouds that are causing shadows. And sometimes there's more shadows than we want. But because we see all this, our perspective changed. And now we see joy in places. So, joy 1.0, joy 2.0. Both are not bad. The Bible talks positive of both, okay? But there is this kind of joy that the Bible talks about that I think a lot of times we have forgotten to pay attention to. Because pastors, people like us, we talk about joy 2.0, and it's like, guys, if you have Jesus, you're going to have joy in your life, and you're like, well, I guess my life is not working because maybe Jesus isn't working today. I don't know what's going on because I don't feel the joy. Pay attention to some of the descriptions that we find in the Christmas story. Caesar, Augustus, he had put out a census. Political oppression. The poor get poorer, the rich get richer. The Jews in particular, the devout Jews, they were the ones who were like, we're going to turn the other cheek. Meanwhile, the Roman Empire were sending out soldiers, beating people down. That's the world that Jesus grew up in. Then they had to travel 95 plus miles while she was in her third trimester. What? And when they got to their hometown, they're tired, she's pregnant. There's no place to stay for Mary and Joe. But this is family, right? I should have family. They should let me stay. No. You guys were together and you have a baby coming out of wedlock. And that's a no-no, right? So they were forced to go to a feeding trough. And they gave birth to a baby. They cleared the food out of the trough and put the baby in there. Happy birthday, Jesus. And then outside, there's these shepherds who are terrified because they are the lowest member of society, because they have a bad reputation, they're found to be unclean, all those things. Luke wrote this story, and he was trying to paint us a picture of people who've had the deepest and darkest and heaviest time of their lives. And in that time, the angels show up and says, there's joy. After this story, baby Jesus is born. They take him to a temple. They meet the guy named Simeon, who's really old, and they meet a lady named Anna. And the description for Anna is interesting. It says that she was married for 70 years. So they usually get married in their teens. And now she's in her 70s. And she's been a widow since the 7 years that she's been married. That means she's shunned out of society. She is considered less in society. She doesn't know how to make money because in that culture, only men could make money. And it says that she walked up to Mary and Joseph and looked at the baby. Now, here's the interesting thing. It's not like Mary and Joseph were walking around with a big sign saying, Messiah, Messiah. She just saw an ordinary couple with a baby, which she probably sees all the time at the temple. And she walks up to the baby and she recognizes that God is here. Why? Because she's able to have the perspective to see the thing that most people will miss, but because she lived through the deepest and darkest and heaviest time of her life, she finds joy in everything she sees. And when she sees it, she's like, oh my gosh, that's the Messiah. And if you read the rest of the book of Luke, this is what you're going to discover. The people who have it good, people who have all the money, all the luxury, all the power, they miss Jesus. Everybody else, there's a carpenter. Oh my goodness, there's a carpenter. There's a rabbi. Oh, you're the Messiah, you're the Son of God. They discover who Jesus is because they lived through the deep and dark parts of their lives. They recognize it because they found joy in the ordinary things. People with Joy 2.0 recognize that everything has the potential to be sacred. So this Christmas, if this Christmas is hard for you because you've had a really tough 2024, maybe you lost somebody, maybe there's a medical diagnosis, maybe something bad has happened, may you have Joy 2.0 this year. Amen?